sermon series on stewardship. That was my plan back at the beginning of October. That the 3 or 4 weeks, including this week, I would look at the different ways that we trust God or have a hard time trusting the God we cannot see. And this was to be, our Commitment Sunday, the ending, the culmination, with this story of Elijah and the widow, where we are reminded why we trust God, who provides for us day by day, and so in response are able to offer sometimes what seems to be the very last of what we have, only to discover in return that God provides for us sometimes in miraculous and unexpected ways. That was the plan. And then I went away for a long weekend and came back with the coronavirus and a case of COVID, and had to take a few weeks off beyond what I had planned to be gone from work and from being in worship with you. Now, I had a relatively mild case. It lasted for 2 weeks from the beginning of my symptoms to when they finally fully went away, but I was never on death's door. But still, it's an uncertain time when you catch this disease. We know that most people survive, of course, for which we give thanks, but you never know for sure how your body and your immune system is going to react. And so, I had I think most of the classic signs of a mild case: low energy, a mild cough that thankfully never really got into my lungs, a low-grade fever that went up and down and up and down, decreased appetite, aches and pains those first few days. I lost my sense of smell. I was telling Pat and Andy that was what sent me, I think that's what I was telling. I was telling somebody out there before church. That was what sent me to the doctor, was when my sense of smell disappeared. And I was going around sniffing everything that day when I was thinking, I really can't smell. And I always can smell everything. I have a good sense of smell. And my poor husband had to deal with all of this. He already had been, a solo parent for 5.5 days while I was supposed to be gone. And then I came back, and he found himself continuing on much longer in the role of solo parent and education supervisor for my kids who were doing virtual school. And he was tired out and worried and quarantined in our house, which I think kind of sums up the way many of us may feel after these past several months of pandemic, with uncertainty and exhaustion, whether you're exhausted from anxiety or just tired of the situation and wanted to go back to normal, tired of having to change and accommodate how we live in the world, and just that always present not knowing what may happen next. And not just the pandemic, some of us live with that in different ways. Elijah was in kind of a similar situation, not a pandemic, of course, but a years-long trial. He is called to be a prophet of God who speaks God's truth to the powers that be in a way that put his life at risk. We kind of just dive into his story here, but the context, you remember last week when I wasn't here, but I do, I was paying attention to what the story was. We had David who had it in his heart and his mind to build this temple for God, and God says, no, it won't be you, it'll be Solomon. And Solomon has this tremendous reign of this unified kingdom where he builds and grows his wealth and his wives. And then Solomon died, and the kingdom split into Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And we are in Israel about 100 years, give or take, after Solomon's death. And there has just been a series of bad kings, one after the next in Israel. And along comes Ahab. We don't see much of him in this story, but in chapter 16, the Bible tells us that Ahab did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him, which is saying something because they were all just bad, one after the other. And Ahab has married Jezebel. We remember her name because it's still, we call someone a Jezebel, we may not realize it comes from the Bible, but she is a Phoenician woman, a foreign woman who is a worshiper of the god Baal. And Ahab has set up an altar for Baal and sacred poles for worshiping the goddess Asherah. So Ahab has allowed worship of foreign gods in his kingdom. And it is not insignificant that Baal is the god of storms, the god of rain that, comes, and thus is the god of fertility, because the rain is what allows things to grow. So it is not an accident that Elijah shows up, and this is his first appearance in the biblical story. He comes out of nowhere. There's no backstory. And he comes to share a word of God and declares to the worshipers of the God of rain and storm that there shall be no rain, not even any dew in these years, except by Elijah's word. He lays down the challenge for this foreign god, and then God says, all right, now get out and go hunt. And he flees from Ahab to Jezebel into the wilderness that God has sent him to, outside of the jurisdiction of their kingdom, and lives there by the wadi, which is just kind of a depression in the ground. When the rains would come, the water wouldn't penetrate because the ground was so dry, but it would kind of all run into these depressions, these wadis that pool up there. And that is where Elijah got water for the time he was there. And God sent ravens with bread and water morning and evening to feed them. He drank from the wadi until the drought caused it to dry up. And then God says, go to Zarephath in Sidon, which is a Phoenician region. To the widow I have commanded there to feed you. God sends Elijah into the heart of Baal territory, where it is evident that even there, this God, Elijah's God, is at work. God's power rules there too, because they are also suffering from the drought. We see this widow gathering just a few sticks down to her last bit of flour, her last little bit of oil. And this is who God sends Elijah to in the midst of the drought, in the face of his need. To someone who is in as dire straits as he is. A woman who is nearing the point of starvation, preparing to die with her son after their last supper. And then God shows up again in this unexpected and miraculous fashion. Elijah says, bring me a little bit to drink. And while she's on her way, he says, oh, and then bring me some bread too when you come back. And she tells him her story, how she is down to almost nothing. And Elijah says to her, do not be afraid. This oft repeated throughout the Bible, beginning to end, this command, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, says Elijah, because God promises that this jar of meal and this jug of oil will not be emptied until the drought ends. Somehow, God will provide for her what she and her son will need to survive this time. Not an overwhelming amount. God doesn't say, here, bring me a bigger jug, I'm going to fill it up to the top. But just day by day, replenishing what they take so that there is always just enough to keep them going. She and Elijah and her son and her household for 3 years before God sends Elijah back to Ahab with a word from the Lord. And you can read those stories. Those are pretty exciting ones. Have you ever come to that place where you feel like you are at the end of your resources, the end of your energy, the end of your hope, the end of your trust, the end of your faith, the end of your growth? It is hard when we come to those places where things are so hard and we seem to have so little to meet the need. For us to trust that God will somehow come through, that God will provide somehow what we need. And yet so often God does show up for those situations in unexpected, sometimes even miraculous ways. not usually through ravens, but often through people. And I have in my, my sermon manuscript here, God's people, but not always even people who identify as God's people. This widow was not one of God's people in the way that Elijah would have understood it. God shows up for those, through those who dare to share out of whatever it is that they have, even when it seems like so little. This was certainly our experience in these past few weeks, though our circumstances were nowhere near as close to the edge as Elijah and the widow and her son. But so many people showed up to help and support my family, and especially Andy, as he dealt with a sick wife and 3 cooped up kiddos and trying to work and manage the house and make sure that I had what I need. God showed up mostly in the form of food, just as God did in this story. There was a day when Andy was just about to say, "All right, kids, what are we going to have for lunch?" And there was a knock on the door, and it was a delivery person from a restaurant. Someone had arranged for food to be brought for our family just at the right time. Another person dropped off, 2 of those big things of soup from Costco and a can of mac and cheese. People brought donuts. That was a popular offering. And beer for the grown-up in the house. And the fixing for root beer floats. Someone else picked up dog food when Andy realized we were completely out and delivery takes a day or 2 and we couldn't leave. Pumpkins got left on our porch from a family who didn't want our kids to miss out on the fun of Halloween. They're still sitting on the porch. We're open as part of the day. But they knew our kids couldn't trick or treat, that we couldn't go to the pumpkin patch, and so they brought Halloween fun to us. And they were cold and hard, so many prayers. Remind us that we're not alone in this challenge. That really, kind of knocks the flat. So often God shows up for us when we are at the end of our rope by coming in the form of love and concern and offerings of others. Just enough to meet the needs of each day, refilling that little jug and jar when we thought we were about to run empty. In our case, actually, we still have some of the leftovers from the generosity of others, so we had more than enough. But we needed kind of that emotional support day by day. So I guess in the end, though, this isn't the culmination of a stewardship series. This is still a sermon about stewardship, not just in the sense of giving back to God, but in recognizing all of the things that God gives us, the ways that God blesses us so that we may be a blessing to others. To not just give to the church, but to pay our blessings forward, to help those who are in need, whether that is through the church and the ways that we pool our money and give back and change our community, or through more individual offerings to individuals we know who are in need, that we might be able to fill that need, or to organizations that need help that we are able to provide. We may not always feel like the widow that we have much to offer or even much to spare, but when we place that in trust into the hands of God, God multiplies it. And together we make a difference in the lives of those around us. May God give us the faith of the widow and of Elijah to share and to receive what God offers, trusting that God will make it enough and not let it run